As you've probably realized, I like talking about the editing of action films, but I understand that you might be bored of hearing me talk about it. So I'm going to go halfway with this video. And though this is still about editing action flicks, it's not just me giving insight. You've also got someone with real, first-hand knowledge of how the biggest blockbusters get made. So let me welcome editor Eddie Hamilton, the man who edited the last two Mission Impossible films, Kingsman, KickAss, and so much more. Mr. Hamilton, welcome and congratulations on the success of Fallout. Were you expecting such a good reception to this film?
I have to say that I think the audience and the critical reaction has been beyond anything we dared hope, actually. Feels like everyone's responding very positively, which is enormously rewarding.
I want to go back to Rogue Nation and talk about possibly one of my favourite sequences in the whole franchise, the opera scene. How much of a challenge was it to put that sequence together?
The opera scene was easily the hardest sequence to get working properly in the film. It was extremely complicated. You've got multiple characters, you've got multiple locations. In order to educate the audience as to the geography, you need to hold their hand quite a lot and show them where everything is, so that as the sequence builds to the climax, you are explaining less and less about the world and just allowing the story to happen. So they are completely educated by the end when Ethan is having to make the decision about how to save the Chancellor. It was the very first shot and the very last shot of principal photography. The very first shot was of Ethan, where we reveal him for the first time in the sequence. And the very last shot, which was done about 7 months later, was Ethan going up a ladder, and then the camera pulls back and we reveal Ilsa in the foreground loading her sniper rifle. We needed that one piece of geography so that you have a sense of their proximity when he gets to the top, and then the fight with the blonde assassin starts. As I was assembling the sequence and building it and refining it with Chris McQuarrie, we would go ahead and schedule little pickups of action. The big challenge was trying to use the real opera in continuity where possible, making sure that certain bits of action land on certain parts of the opera. It just took months of love and craft and test screenings to tell that exact little tiny piece of story that you needed.
And how does a huge but fairly contained set piece like the opera compare to editing something like the car and bike chase we see later in the film?
With that action footage, you are given the footage and you make the scene work. You don't have an opportunity to go back like we did in the opera and dial in additional shots to help tell the story. All that stuff was filmed on location. So you have to make those scenes work.
And you had quite a tight schedule to get that all done, right?
We edited that film in about 10, 11 weeks. Again, like Fallout, it was incredibly fast.
I imagine a director like Christopher McQuarrie at least makes a schedule like that a bit more manageable.
Chris McQuarrie is exceptionally good at editing and understands nothing is sacred at all. And if it can go, it must go, because the film will be better. Both of these films, Rogue Nation and Fallout, are both quite long films. They're well over 2 hours. The audience is not going to forgive you if they even feel a moment of repetition or a moment where the story isn't being progressed.
Did the bike chase have the same challenges as the car sequence?
Now, the motorbike chase was a different beast. There was a much more ambitious sequence originally planned. He ends up being forced to the other side of the highway and he rides against the traffic in order to catch up with Ilsa. There was quite an elaborate sequence where he was going to come alongside a truck with some large pipes and he was going to shoot the pipes so they became free and they tumbled onto the road on the opposite carriageway and knocked over some bikers. All this stuff was planned and prevised quite heavily. It was very exciting, really cool stuff. The problem was that I was looking at this footage and I was comparing it to the storyboards and the previs. I only had about a third of the footage that I actually needed to tell the story that was in the previs. And I remember contacting the script supervisor and saying, when am I going to get the 2/3 of the outstanding shots? She said, oh no, we've finished. We've run out of time on that location. That's all you're going to get. I thought, well, that is a challenge. I now have to make an exciting sequence out of only 1/3 of the footage that I was expecting. We had to come up with another story using the existing footage. So we managed to tell this story of Ilsa and then 2 bikers and then Ethan.
Did that make keeping a sense of geography quite difficult?
We do have geography because we use, right at the beginning of the scene, it's a big helicopter shot flying over the freeway, revealing the 4 bikes. And then we see Ethan riding, and then we cut to a shot of Ilsa kind of looking behind her, and then we see Ethan tucking in behind the bikes. From this quite elaborate sequence that was planned of Ethan riding on the other side and shooting the pipes and all that stuff, it just came down to a very simple piece of action with Ethan, but it is incredibly exciting to watch. And then, of course, the other difference with the opera is that in the car chase, we're sticking with sound design. Go, 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 go! Which, of course, you can do in a car chase. You have lots of different perspectives in the sound. With a motorbike chase, motorbike engines sound like a high-pitched whine almost all the time. It's not quite such an interesting soundscape sonically. Which is why we decided to layer in that incredibly propulsive piece of Joe Kramer's score. You feel that there is an escalation, so you're kind of leaning forward now because there's now music taking you through that motorbike chase. Chris McQuarrie is very specific about music. He will sit with the composer and really craft the score to the picture. Matthew Vaughn also does that. He's extremely specific about the music in every sequence. And Chris McQuarrie is the same, which is why I think the music in those films, and in Fallout especially, works so well to the picture. As an audience, you sit and watch it and it's great fun. You're just in the moment and you don't really think about all the layers of detail. The easier something is to watch and comprehend, the harder it has been to craft and get it to that level.
Now, in terms of challenges on set, you've worked on some very celebrated one-take sequences in one way or another, such as Kingsman's church scene, which does employ a number of hidden stitches. That must be quite tough from an editing standpoint, especially in terms of pacing, I imagine.
That church sequence was about 8 months planning from the first conversation that Matthew had with Brad Allen, the action designer. Brad Allen also was the action designer on KickAss, so you can see some similarities to some of the creative action that we have in Kingsman. He also designed, interestingly, the Darth Vader corridor attack at the end of Rogue One.
I didn't know that. And with that church scene, was everything we saw on screen everything that you guys had to work with?
It was originally longer. We were able to remove a small section of action hidden in a whip pan.
Well, it feels exactly the right length. How do you get to that point of knowing when it isn't outstaying its welcome?
You sit and watch it with an audience. I must have seen Kingsman 400 times or something. I mean, endlessly. I mean, that church fight, watching it over and over again to refine it and make sure it was completely smooth so that when you watched it, you got the full experience of feeling like it was an uninterrupted piece of action.
And I find it interesting that there was a long take originally planned for KickAss that you later cut down in post. What was that original sequence like and why did you chop it down?
It was awesome and it ran for maybe 2.5 minutes, but there was quite a lot of pieces where Nicolas Cage was walking up the stairs or walking along a platform. It didn't have enough story or energy for long enough to earn its place in the film at 2 minutes long. I said, listen guys, I've got an idea. I'm going to just try a really jump-cutty version built around the percussive nature of the impacts and the gunshots. That was the story behind how that sequence ended up being jump cut in the finished film. The scene required it because it didn't quite work at the length it was. In my experience, a lot of the time when you are forced into being cutty is because the individual shots themselves don't earn their place any longer than that.
Can you think of any films you feel really utilise that faster style well?
The Bourne Ultimatum, which is a masterpiece of editing. The whole film is constructed around that kind of energy. It's the style of those films. You're embracing that very kinetic, energetic, cutty style. And I think Tony Scott's Domino being probably the most intense version of that. Man on Fire was great. That had a fantastic rhythm and enormous amount of style. But then when he did Domino, I think he dialed it up to 11 and went too far. I don't know. What do you feel about that, Ross?
I agree with you, but I feel for him it was important to go to that too far place. So so he could know what was genuinely too much. It let him later come to a sort of midpoint that worked perfectly for a film like Unstoppable.
Absolutely, totally right. It's like he took a step back from Domino and then found the true path in Unstoppable again. I agree with you.
So talking of great action directors, how do Christopher McQuarrie and Matthew Vaughn differ in their technique?
The way Chris McQuarrie films action is he figures out where he wants to put the cameras when he sees the action performed in the real environment, in the real light. Then he will put the cameras down and film it from several angles and then go in and do specials. Matthews is more of a Hong Kong method and Chris is more of a traditional Hollywood method of filming coverage.
I'd like to ask about other films now, ones that inspire you, and whether or not current trends or what other filmmakers are doing influences your work.
Like you, I'm a huge fan of action movies. The films that got me excited about wanting to work in the industry are Star Wars, Aliens, Die Hard, RoboCop, Back to the Future, masterpieces of action cinema. So I'm absolutely aware of trends and I try and watch as much as I can. Certainly every film that does well at the box office I watch because I want to know what audiences are responding to. But the way to do a film justice is to look at the raw footage and make the best sequence that exists out of that, which is a unique puzzle to that film only.
That is a fantastic way to put it. Is that why on something like Resident Evil Apocalypse you resorted to a perhaps more cut-heavy style than your more recent work?
It's extremely difficult to film believable fight sequences with a man in an enormous cumbersome suit. So you're forced into using that editing style. There's so many cuts in a film like that because the shots only last as long as they can to be any good. A lot of editing is just trying to make the footage that you have work and make it feel like it was designed to be like that rather than it's been massaged into that.
That makes a lot of sense, and I'd be remiss to not bring up your other video game film at this point, DOA Dead or Alive. How was that experience for you?
Corey Ewan pretty much left me to put that film together. He was doing like little assemblies of the fights on the set. I did get to see those, so I had a rough idea of what he wanted, but he watched it right at the end and said, "Great job, you've done a great job." But I kind of just played around with some fun stuff, which probably wouldn't exist in a bigger budget movie. You have less at stake when the budgets are lower, and you can have a bit more fun and creativity with the editing on a film like DOA.
Well, Eddie, thank you so much for your incredible insight.
Appreciate it.
Best of luck with the continued success of Fallout, and I look forward to speaking again about that film more in depth very soon.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.